Hey, how you doing? This is Tom, and this is Tom's Radio Room Show, and I'm here with Rob. His channel is the 741 YouTube channel, and we're going to take some questions first about the SDRplay products, and then general questions about anything you want to ask. I've got about a half a dozen questions that I've gotten recently that we can address, both Rob and I. So let me show you my screen. We'll share my screen here. And okay, we get that little mirror effect. I'll get rid of that. And then I have this little slideshow that we can start with. Let me hide this down here. And we can go up to begin slideshow. So again, this is Tom's Radio Room Show with Rob, 741. And we're going to answer some questions today. At least that's the plan. A little disclaimer, and I probably should use this more often. We are not professionals in making YouTube shows. We're just everyday guys, wanting to share information and get information. So we'll make mistakes. We also are not experts in radios, any of these radios. We just give you our experiences with these radios. We're both still learning about SDRs. SDRs been out for a while, but things are improving. They're getting more complicated, meaning they have more options, and we're still learning. We're helping each other right now, and hopefully we can help you people that are watching this show or watch the show after it's been completed. Take everything we say and check it out for yourself. We can make mistakes. I guarantee I'll make a mistake. So if you see something that doesn't sound right, check it out. Or even if it sounds right, still go other places and see if we told you the correct information. If you have corrections, please post them as a comment for everyone to see, or you can email me corrections, comments to TRRS73@gmail.com. Okay, on with the show. Next slide here, Tommy boy. Whoa, what did I do there?
Hey, Tom, before you get too far, I will let you know that everything looks good with the stream today. We've got 6 people in there, and I'm waiting for the comments in the chat room. So I think we're actually on the air today.
Yeah. What Rob is referring to is we tried to do a hangout yesterday, and we had some problems. And one of them was I never started the actual broadcast, because what you can do is, like, Rob and I can hook up and it looks like we're broadcasting, but until I hit that broadcast button, nothing goes out. And I was like, how come we have no viewers? Well, that was why. And it doesn't record. So I couldn't even post it later. So we kind of had a dry run yesterday of what we're going to do today. And Rob, you can break in anytime you have a correction or somebody has a comment like, oh, your video is dropping out or something like that. So
sure,
feel free. Okay, here's the questions. This is a brand new question I got about a day ago. Is the RSP2 worth the extra $60 over the RSP1A? That's the RSP Play SDRs. And I've got a chart on that too. And let me go to the chart. I'll try to go to the chart. Stand by. Let's go Alt Tab. Where's the chart? I lost the chart. Oh, I had a chart.
I might have it up over here.
Let me, oh, here it is right here.
Nope, got it?
That's PowerPoint. I don't want PowerPoint. Do you have it up, Rob?
Let me make sure. Yep, I do. Now I lost it again too. Do you want me to share it?
Yes. Let me get back to this. Like I said, we're not professionals.
Yeah, can you tell?
That's what I want, and I want to close mine there, and then I'll select Rob, and now he can share his.
Okay, let's see. Sure, that's fine. And are you seeing it, Tom?
Yes.
Okay.
So I put to get this together this morning. I got this off of one of the other documents on the SDRplay website, and I was not able to find this chart with the 1A on it. I found it with the 1, so I replaced the 1 with the 1A, and I highlighted in red the deltas from the 1 to the 1A. And then now we can compare the 1A to the 2 and the 2 Pro. And I'm going to let Rob go through this.
Okay, so just kind of my overall feeling on it is the answer to that first question is it depends. And it depends on what it is you want to do with the radio. And like Tom said, you've got to kind of look at this chart and kind of weigh out what you're going to do with the radio to determine whether it's worth it to you or not. Now, one of the major differences that I know about between the 1A and the 2 is here. You can see that there's a high impedance port on the RSP2. So if you have an antenna, like a long wire or something that has a higher impedance than a standard, say like a dipole or something like that, and you don't have a matching transformer or a balun or something, then you're probably going to get better performance with this high impedance port on the RSP2. There's a couple of other things. There's an extra 50 ohm port on the RSP2. Now, it doesn't have the dual receivers, but it has 2 antenna ports. So if you want to compare antennas, you have 2 different antennas for 2 different bands type of thing, and you don't want to switch between them, you can hook them both up at the same time to the RSP2, and that's kind of another big advantage of that. Let's see, there's some other things.
Okay, that's over the 1, because the 1A has that also.
No, the 1A only has 1 port.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, the 1A only has 1 50 ohm port, whereas the 2 has the 2 50 ohm ports and the high impedance port.
Okay, so the 1A has the 1 SMA port and 1 high impedance port.
No, the 1A only has 1 50 ohm port, 1 SMA port. There's no high impedance on it.
Oh, okay. You're right. You're correct. You're correct. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Let's see. Some of these other things are maybe more, and I'm not sure. Oh, okay. So this very left column is 1A stuff, Tom, the red?
Yes.
Okay. So that's really, let's see, software selectable. Yeah, see, I'm not sure on the 2 if it has the preamp, the bias T out, because I don't have a 2, and I don't think Tom does either. So
No.
we're not experts in the 2. So I'm not sure of all the different things that it has. But those are the 2 things that I know about with the 2 that are better. Now, of course, the 2 Pro, the big thing there is it has the ruggedized metal case. So if you're considering the 2 Pro, you're going to use it out in the field or something like that, or you have an environment where RFI is a concern, then you might want to look at the 2 Pro because of the metal case over the 1A, so to speak, that kind of a thing. So I'm not sure. Like I said, those are the biggest things. Now, didn't we kind of talk this through yesterday, Tom, and we thought that the 1A had an extra pre-selection filter in it?
Yes, it has. There's two entries there. The new one I added, which says it's 11 for the 1A, and then the one that was in the chart before, which is 10 for the 2 and the 2 Pro.
Yeah, so the 1A actually has an extra filter, and I may be wrong on this. Like Tom said at the beginning of the disclosure, we're not experts. But I think the 1A has the newer 14-bit analog to digital converter in it, whereas the 2 has a 12-bit. Now, are you really going to notice that much of a difference? Probably not, unless you're really digging out those fringe stations or some other kind of application that's on the edge. But for everyday listening, I don't think you'll notice a difference between those two things. But that is a difference between the two, and the 1A has the advantage there.
Okay, so I have, as you pointed out, two obvious mistakes in this chart, in that the 1A does not have two SMA connectors, and it doesn't have the high impedance input. So that's wrong on my chart.
Yeah, that's okay.
No, it's not okay. I made a mistake. I made a mistake. I'll admit it. Okay. And you are correct. I'm trying to point to it with my mouse. You are correct. The 1A does have the 14-bit DAC, which to me, this implies that the 1A came after the 2 and the 2 Pro as far as design is concerned.
I believe it did.
Yeah. So the 1A is, as far as design, is the newest design.
Yeah, the 1A and the Duo use the newest architecture, whereas the 2 uses the, I'll call it older. But again, the differences are kind of minute, at least in my experience and the type of listening that I do. So I wouldn't let that hold you back. It's just, when you're looking at a spec sheet, the 1A looks a little bit better. But again, performance-wise, it's probably not that huge a deal.
Okay, so let me go back and share my screen again so we can get back to the slides. Get to this. I wish you wouldn't cause that mirror effect, but I guess you have to. Now, are you seeing the slides now, Rob?
Yep, I'm back seeing your slides.
Okay, so let's go back to this first question. Is the RSP2, which costs an extra $60, the 1A is $109 and the 2 is $169. That's the base price. Is it worth the extra $60?
Yeah, and again, that's a bit subjective. You've got to look at the chart there, and to me, I guess it depends on what you're going to do with the radio. If you need those extra antenna ports that the 2 offers, then I'd go with the 2. If you don't need them, you can get by with just one 150 ohm port, then you're probably okay with the 1A. All the other specs are pretty comparable to each other on both radios.
All righty, I think it answers that question. And of course, what you can do on the 1A, you can use external components to get the extra antenna and the high impedance antenna connection.
Yeah, if you need that.
It probably cost you $60 to do that, but you could do that.
Yeah, again, that's a good point.
Okay, the next question is, how powerful a computer, and this is kind of a very generic question, is needed to run SDR Uno, which is fairly complicated and it does a lot of things. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, that's a bit of a subjective question too. I don't know that there's a hard and fast answer to it. I've seen that question a lot pop up in my comments as well, and I don't have a good answer for it. What I can tell you is my experience is that I have an older Celeron laptop here that runs Windows XP, and I don't remember how much memory is in it, but it can't be any more than 2 gigabytes. It's probably less. And without any other applications running at the same time, and keeping the sample rate and decimation at fairly low levels, under 2 megahertz anyway, I don't have any problem running SDR Uno, or I think I can run SDR console on that too with the RSP Play radios, and it's fine. It's obviously not the fastest thing in the world, but you can listen to something and it doesn't drop out or do anything like that. So you can use pretty old hardware. And then, like Tom and I discussed yesterday, there's a lot of platforms supported by SDRplay, and one of those is Raspberry Pi, which of course is just a little one-board computer. It's not very powerful at all, and a lot of people are successfully running their RSPs through Raspberry Pi. So I think the hardware, I think you can get by with some lower spec older hardware if you're willing to kind of keep the bandwidth low and not expect, every single feature to work, constantly all the time, I guess is probably the way I'd put it. What do you think, Tom?
I kind of have to agree with you. And I think it boils down to exactly what you said. If you can live with a restricted bandwidth, and I say bandwidth of what you're showing on the screen on the spectrum display, if you can keep that down to 2 megahertz or less, then you can use a less powerful machine. If you want to use the full bandwidth capability of the SDR, you're going to have a powerful machine. And what I mean by powerful machine, you're going to have at least a quad-core computer and not run other things at the same time. Like I struggle with my computer. I'm running a quad-core right now, and I struggle with it when I'm trying to do a hangout on the air or I'm trying to do screen capture and run SDR Uno. So yes, you don't have to have a real powerful computer if you're willing to live with less bandwidth being displayed on your screen.
Sounds good.
Okay, the next one is, and Rob started touching on this, what other software will work with the SDRplay hardware?
Yeah, and that's you got to go to the website, I guess, to kind of check that out.
I can do that. Hold on. I can try to do that.
But that's when I get that question, I pretty much direct people to the website. And
okay, if we go, here's the website. You should be seeing the website, Rob. Is that
yep, it's there.
And you go to downloads, software, and you get this page, and they have software, as Rob mentioned, for many different platforms, including the Raspberry Pi. So I'll click on Windows. And so these are the packages they have available. So they have their SDR Uno, which they have 2 versions, one for the 1A, and 2, and a different version for the Duo. Then they have this Spectrum Analyzer program. Then they have these programs that are been around for a while for SDRs in general. This is the HD SDR program. And then down here, as Rob mentioned, here's SDR console. Here's the old version and the latest version, or a new version. And these that I mentioned, the SDR consoles, the HD SDR, and of course the SDR Uno. And there's one more down on the bottom here, but it's kind of old, is SDR Sharp. They have a plug-in for that, but it only works with the older versions. But these other versions up here are already set up with the drivers that are needed. Like right here, it says HD SDR includes hardware drivers. So a lot of times, I know when I first got into SDRs, I struggled with getting them to work because I didn't have those hardware drivers. So you need those two. These downloads already have those drivers available. So there's quite a few of not only SDR Uno, but other popular, which you may be familiar with, SDR control programs.
Yeah, and I'll throw the caveat in there that the Windows SDR Uno and SDR console are probably the most popular and well supported versions out there. HD SDR is too, actually. But then when you start looking at some of the other versions, the Linux, the Mac, the Raspberry Pi, and so on, getting those pieces of software to run are probably a little more fiddly. You may have to do some extra stuff and jump through some extra hoops to get those to work. So it's a good idea if you're playing with those to also download the how-to guides and app notes and things that are on the right side of the screen when you're doing that. But the main packages, Uno, console, and HD SDR, pretty much install and run without too much issue.
Okay, since you mentioned it and we're here, the other half of this page is documentation. So like here's the SDR user's manual. Here's the manual for the SDR RSP Duo. And then I thought it was here, but maybe it's one of these other ones. There's a cookbook that I think Mike help write it. Mike is the support person at SDRplay. And one other thing, so those documentations here, and they're pretty good manuals. One other thing I want to mention while I'm here is contact. Is that it? No, that's not it. Support. I'm trying to find, okay, where is it? Go back to contact.
While you're doing that, Tom,
Yeah.
I looked in the chat room here. We've got a couple people in there. We've got Mag71. It says message retracted. So he must have made a comment and then took it away. And then we got Luis Arivalo. He said he's just wondering if there's any chance on doing a scanner live video. I'm not sure if he means scanning with the SDR or like an old style standalone scanner. But if it's an old style standalone scanner, we can consider that. The SDR, well, you had it working at one point, Tom, didn't you? You could scan with the SDR. I haven't tried that yet.
Yes, I did have that working. I did a show on that. It was a add-on to SDR Sharp. At the time, I was using probably the RTL-SDR dongle, and it worked quite well. It did take a little finagling to get the software working as an add-on to SDR Sharp. Now, the rumor I've heard, and even John at SDR has mentioned it on one of his videos, the next version or upcoming versions, maybe it's not the next one, of SDR Uno will have search capability.
I've heard that too, and I'm eagerly anticipating it.
Yes.
That's going to be a nice add to the software.
Now, here's what I was looking for. Under support, down at the bottom here, support center. Okay, here's where you can open a new ticket. And this could be just for getting information. I've used this before. Matter of fact, I sent one early this morning, which is Sunday. They probably won't get to it. Asking about the chart I showed you and see if they had one that would be more accurate. So you open a new ticket, you give them your name and your email address, and you put in there whatever you need help with. And so I can say this morning I did one, and usually Mike or John will respond, and not necessarily on a Sunday, but I've sent a ticket in during the week, and they respond within a couple of hours. That's how fast it is. So if you've got specific questions like some of the ones we went over, you can go to the source, the experts, and get your question answered there. So I just want to show you that while we were here. Okay, where were we? I'm lost.
We were talking about the software.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
We were back here. We were here.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. Okay, we're down to how is the performance of the RSP-1A or any of the RSPs on VHF and UHF?
Okay, so in my experience, they all work pretty well on VHF. But I haven't tested UHF too much here. I live sort of behind a hill that is in between me and the main kind of UHF activity here in the state. So because UHF is somewhat line of sight, I don't get a lot of UHF activity here in the first place. Most everything in my area is VHF. So I've used it quite a bit on VHF to listen to 2-meter repeaters, business band stuff, railroad, and air traffic. And it works great. I've got just a 2-meter ham antenna that I use when I'm on VHF. And it works great. I have no issues there. In fact, I've even connected it to my my dipole, which is horizontally polarized, and it's cut for 80 and 40 meters. It's a fan dipole. And I've run that on VHF, and it works great. I've even heard satellite signals there. So no issues at all on VHF. Like I said, UHF I haven't tested too much with it, just because on other radios I don't get much here, so I never think of it. But one thing we talked about yesterday, Tom and I touched on, is in terms of the higher frequencies. We both have used ours with success to receive the ADSB signals, which are up in the gigahertz range. What is it, 1.090?
Correct.
Like that. And we've used those. We've both used those on less than ideal antennas for that frequency, and have been able to receive a fair amount of air traffic. So I'd say the performance up there is pretty good.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I just recently, about 3 days ago, was playing with what you just mentioned, is listening to the aircraft transponders up at 1.09 gigahertz now we're talking about. And it worked quite well. Now, the thing about that is, since it's such high frequency, reception is line of sight. So if your antenna can't see the aircraft, then you're not going to receive much. So that's the thing. Once you get up in those higher frequencies, then your antenna basically has to be able to see the transmitter. And I struggle with that at my location because I got a lot of tall trees in my area. And so I've noticed that when I'm trying to monitor these transponders on these aircraft, I usually get aircraft that are far away, but they're high altitude, 25,000, 30,000 feet up, versus local aircraft, say, that are within 20 miles, but they're low altitude. And that's because of all the trees around my house. So
same here.
So in general, I have the 1 and the 1A, and they both work very good on ultra high frequency, I'll call it. And of course, I've checked them using the NOAA weather stations at 162 and up, and they work fine there. So yeah, I would say that the performance on the VHF and UHF is more than adequate. Now, other thing I'll mention while we're talking about this in general is that one of the biggies of the SDRplay SDRs, unlike these inexpensive dongles, I'm talking about the ones that are originally made for TV reception that are less than $20. In order to receive the HF band, the shortwave band, you have to change modes from quadrature to, I believe, either Q mode or I mode. Otherwise, you won't pick up anything on shortwave. And even then, when you do that, the reception is not going to be as good as an SDRplay or some more expensive SDRs. Now, I do have the RTL-SDR.com dongle, and it's a TV dongle that was designed, that was upgraded by the designer, and it works good on HF as well as UHF and VHF, but still not as good as the RSP1, 1A and up. All righty.
And I'll mention one last thing on the VHF that you kind of reminded me. I've done some testing here with both the 1 and the 1A, where I've had them online and looking at the NOAA weather frequency band, and I can receive more stations on the RSPs than I can on my traditional scanners, as far as those frequencies are concerned. So that kind of gives you an idea that they're working just fine. I'll also interrupt here. I looked at the chat room, Tom, and we've got Terry Henderson in here, and he says, "Hi, Tom." And then he also says 20 meters was active this AM, Tom.
All righty. Thanks for the report. Yeah, this These past few days, the shortwave bands have gotten a little better. The solar flux index came out of the toilet. It was down below 70. It has been as high as 75 this week, which is still not great. We want it to be above 100. And I've got another question later on about that, so I'll stop babbling so we can get to that, the only other question about shortwave listening. Next one is it important to have a metal case? Because the more expensive SDR plays have either a metal case or a metal shielding inside of a plastic case. What do you think, Rob?
Again, this is one of those things I think depends on your environment and where you're using the radio. The two advantages of the metal case, of course, are ruggedness and RFI or EMI shielding. And in my case, I haven't had any problem with any kind of RFI or EMI with the plastic case of the One. And the 1A, of course, has the metal coated case on the inside. And I've really noticed no difference between the two in terms of any RFI or EMI or anything like that at my location. So for me, I don't think it matters. But if you're going to use this thing as a field radio for some reason, you're going to be throwing it in a backpack and banging it around. The metal case is definitely going to be an advantage there. And then if you have a noisy environment in terms of EMI or RFI, then the metal case may be an advantage. But I can't point to any examples from my experience that show that that really makes a difference. What do you think, Tom?
Do you see my desktop?
I do.
Okay, here's the One and the 1A. And as far as the proximity of my computer, especially my monitor, is they are right, my monitor's right, and let me show you. See if I can show you. Here's my monitor right here. And my computer is down on the floor next to my desk. And I'm not using, I don't think these are shielded cables. And they definitely don't have the built-in filter in them. So I'm using unshielded cables. And like I say, they're close to my monitor and my computer, and I've not had any problems with either of these. The 1A is supposed to have, they're both plastic cases. The 1A is supposed to have some shielding inside the case. I haven't opened it to verify that. And the 1A doesn't. It is just pure plastic, and I haven't had any problems, none at all. So except to ruggedize it, and maybe your computer is noisy or you have other things in your room that are creating RFI, I don't see paying the extra price for a case. Now, you can also get, and this is probably where the question came from, you can get third-party cases. So you take these things apart, you take the guts, and it's just a board and a connector, and you put it inside this metal case, and then you got your metal case. So you can get that. I don't know how much it costs. I think it's maybe $25 for that case. So that's probably where the question came up is, should I buy that metal case?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Tom. You know, if you think you need it, then it's probably worth it. And then, like you said, with the USB cables, I've run the unshielded ones and had no issue. I have some here. I don't know if they're shielded, but they have ferrites in them. And I just use them because I have them. And, you know, why not type of thing. But I don't think that there's really any difference between them and a standard non-shielded cable like what you have. So,
Rob,
at least in my shack.
Rob, have you actually done any comparison test with the shielded cable versus non-shielded?
Not hardcore or anything like that. No, but I have just kind of observed where I've had a cheap cable, plugged it in, was using the radio, and then put the better cable on and looked to see if there was any difference. And I didn't notice any, but I didn't do any hardcore, you know, tests or measurements or anything like that. It was just more of a casual observation.
But you did observe that there were any differences in
I couldn't see any.
your setup.
Yeah, I couldn't see any.
Okay, I guess we've already answered the next question is it important to have shielded USB cables? And I guess it depends on your environment. Both Rob and I say we don't notice any difference with shielded or unshielded USB cables. Okay, the next question is, what is the maximum bandwidth you can display? Again, this is kind of a generic question. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, and that depends on your hardware, so it goes kind of back up to the second question. If you've got, a supercomputer over there, you can go and use the full 10 megahertz. But if you've got an older computer, then you're gonna have to narrow it down, or you're gonna start to get dropouts, or it's not gonna work at all. And the best way to know is to try it, really. But having said that, like we kind of looked at yesterday, even though you're displaying and technically receiving that bandwidth, I don't think the whole thing is usable. I think it's limited.
Yeah, I had a question yesterday for Rob, and I had noticed that when I was looking at the spectrum display, and I was displaying, say, 2 megahertz, that the ends of the display, both beginning of the frequency of the displays and the ending, were dropped off. And I was asking Rob, I said, why does this look like it's being cut off by like a filter or something? And that's when he pointed out what he just said about, even though you have the bandwidth set to, say, 2 megahertz, we noticed that it was only displaying, or yeah, I'll say displaying. I think that's the right term.
Sure.
600.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference here, and I'm not versed enough in the SDR architecture and the software to really know the exact answer to why that does that. But what you have is you have your receive bandwidth, which is whatever your sample rate is set to, so like 2 megahertz or 4 megahertz or whatever. But what happens is you end up getting a resultant IF bandwidth out of that. And I think that has to do with the filtering and the software. And it ends up being less than that total sample rate. So your real bandwidth is always going to be less than that selected sample rate. And I think it's because of a combination of the internal filtering and just the way the software processes the signals. But I may not have a full understanding of that. There may be a more technical reason for it.
Yeah, along those lines, the other thing I observed, didn't quite understand it, but I observed that with nothing else running, well, nothing else that I know of that was running, so I had no screen capture software or anything like that running. If I ran, let's just pick the 1A. If I ran the 1A under SDR console, I could select, with my particular computer, I could select a wider bandwidth than I could under SDR Uno. And I'm talking about significant. On SDR Uno, with nothing else running, so nothing else using up the CPU power, I could use about 4 megahertz bandwidth. I could select that. If I went beyond that, then I started getting dropouts. If I went to SDR console, and I don't understand this, so maybe if John or Mike watches this video, he can explain that to us. If I went to SDR console, I could display twice that. I could display 8 megahertz with no dropouts. So I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, it's probably something to do with the software and the way it's written and the way it processes the signal and stuff, I would think. I haven't, excuse me, I haven't done that test myself over here to see if I'm seeing the same thing or what bandwidths I'm able to get up to. But I should do that at some point here when I can find some time, just to see if my observations are in line with yours, Tom.
All righty, let's move on. What kind of connectors or adapters are needed to connect to these devices? And speaking as an example with the 1A and the 1, because they have the SMA connectors, which up until about a year ago, I wasn't even familiar with these. And I had to buy for my other ones, well, these two, I had to buy a bunch of adapters so that I could hook up to my like SO 235s, 239s, and B and C. And so, what has been your experience, Rob?
Yeah, same thing. I've just used the cheap adapters you can get on Amazon, the SMA to SO239, and those seem to work okay. I don't know if you'd want to transmit through those, at least not a whole lot of power, but because you're just receiving, it's not really an issue on these. I don't think you're really getting any loss or anything through them, appreciable amount, but there may be better quality adapters out there you can buy. But I have the one just like what you show there, Tom, and I've had pretty good success with those. Now, of course, having said that, if you have one of the SDRplay units or another SDR that has the wire inputs, like for instance the high impedance ports on the RSP2 and the RSP Duo, then you don't need that kind of an adapter. You'd need, either run your wire right into your radio, or you might have some kind of a matching transformer or a balun or something like that. But for the 50 ohm port, these cheapo adapters from Amazon seem to work fine for me.
Yeah, I think these were about $3.50 on Amazon. And then I've got a bunch of connector adapters. So I could theoretically plug one of those adapters directly to the connector on the RSPs, and then have it like on the other end of the adapter have a connector that would connect directly to this type of cable. But I don't do that because that puts a lot of strain on this connector. So that's why like Rob, I use these short flexible cables. And since we're just receiving, even though there's quite a bit of loss in these small cables, you don't see it too much because it's such a short run and you're not putting any power out to your antenna. The other thing, while I've got visual on my desktop, is this little device here, and I don't know if my camera is focusing very well, but this is a medium wave filter. It's manufactured by rtl-sdr.com, the same people that make that really nice dongle, $20 dongle. They make this one and they make one for FM. And I live in an area where I have a super powerful AM station that the transmitting antenna is only 5 miles from me. And it blew this guy away. I couldn't receive hardly anything on the shortwave band on the RSP1. So I got this with the RSP1 and it fixed that problem. The RSP1A has something like this built in, and it does a fantastic job just as well as this external one does. So that's a big difference between the 1 and the 1A.
Yeah. Let me look in the chat room here real quick, Tom. I think we got a comment. We've got Jeffrey Plum in there. He says, and this goes back to our previous topic. He says, it seems the more basic control programs may have greater bandwidth possibilities. And I think I know what he's getting at, and he's probably right. Whereas the simpler, I don't want to call it simpler, but the maybe the less cluttered SDR console, it's got less going on, so it's able to devote more of its resources to receiving and processing the signal than maybe SDR Uno that has a lot more going on with it in terms of all the little windows and stuff it has to manage and things like that.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind, and this is my understanding, is that SDRplay people bought the rights or they bought the program called Studio One, which was basically what you see with SDR Uno. And it was a fairly expensive piece of software for SDRs, not just for the SDR plays. And they either bought it or bought the rights to it. And that's the basis of their SDR Uno. So it wasn't built from the ground up for these particular SDRs. So that's why they're still doing some modifications and refinement of that basic software. But it was the original software was excellent software, but it was very expensive.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. And like you said, because the SDR Uno is, I guess we'll call it theirs, or is, you know, their go-to software. That's the one that they kind of have the most compatibility with. So that's the one I tend to use more than console. I do like console, but if you're really trying to get a baseline, then SDR Uno is the one, because that's the one that they've kind of developed everything around, and it's going to work in there. You know, console's going to have some advantages and things that are different or better, but that's the case there.
Yeah, part of it is what you're used to. I've used SDR console for years, and I used Simon's. I forgot the name of it already, but Ham Radio Deluxe. That was the first software package he made to control radios even before there were SDRs. And then he sold the rights to that because he started this SDR console and he wanted to devote all his time to SDR console. So he sold the rights to Ham Radio Deluxe. And it used to be free when he had it, but now it's, I think, either $69 or $99. And it, of course, encompasses older technology, such as my ICOM radio that has a serial port interface for controlling it. Okay, moving on. Oh, did you have a comment, Rob? I'm sorry.
Nope, that's it.
Okay, moving on. Should you get a used RSP1 or a new RSP1A? And I guess what they're talking about is getting a used because they don't make RSP1s anymore. You can't get those from the company. I think you can only get those off of eBay used. And so the question is, there's probably a bunch of them showing up on eBay because people are going to the 1A. The question is, should he get one of those ones for, you know, like maybe $50 or something, or should he go ahead and pay the other $50 and get the 1A?
Yeah, that's kind of a good question. My opinion, and that's just my opinion, is if you can get the RSP1 cheap enough, then it's probably worth it, because I don't think that there's a huge difference in performance between the two. The one thing about the 1A that really stands out, and Tom touched on it before, and I notice it here too, it's not as much of a problem for me as Tom, but is that medium wave broadcast filter that's built in to the 1A. That does a real good job of getting rid of unwanted signal images and things like that. The RSP1 doesn't have that built in. So if you already have an external filter like Tom has, or you don't live in an area where that's an issue, or you just want to get started and you can get your hands on an RSP1, you know, for say half the price or less of a 1A, then go for it. Otherwise, I'd say, you know, just save your money and get the 1A. It's not that expensive of a radio in the first place. You know, what are they selling for? 109, and then they probably go on sale for 100 now and then. So if you can get an RSP1 for half that, or, you know, around there, it's probably worth it. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I have to say one thing though, and I know you agree with me, is the vulnerability of this antenna interface to damage. And this is true of not just this particular SDR or any radio, is you can damage that front end. I actually have two Tech. They were kind of this particular radio was the forerunner of these SDRs, in that it's a box and you have to use software to control it, just like these, but it came out probably 10 years ago. And more than once, I have blown the initial preamplifier in that radio. And I have sent it one back to the factory, paid to get it fixed. I had a friend that fixed the second one that I broke. And I think now of the two, I think I only have one that works. So that's something to keep in mind, is somebody might be selling their RSP1 because they've blown that front end FET, that amplifier on the antenna connector. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Tom. And that's why I always shy away from buying stuff on eBay like that these days, because you never know. But if you have a friend that has one that you can try out, or you can get it at, say, like a ham fest, and you have a way to test it, then if you know it's good, then yeah. But Tom's got an excellent point. A lot of people are using these things in their shack as a pan adapter too. So they've got it hooked right up to their radio. And unless they have the right switching or they have it hooked up correctly, it's very easy to pop the front end on these things. So yeah, that's an excellent point. Make sure you're getting a good one if you are going to get a used one. But again, the price on the new ones isn't that high. $100. It's a little steep, I guess, for some people, and it might be worth just saving up for it. That's kind of what I did when I decided I wanted one. I have my hobby fund, and I put a few dollars in there every week, and then got my first one that way. And it might be worth the wait to just get a new one, like you said, Tom, just to eliminate that problem. But if you can get a cheap one, a cheap used one, and you can trust it, then you'll enjoy it just as much, I think. While I've got the floor here, let me look in the chat room. There's been some activity. Jeffrey Plum commented on our previous topic there. He said one might use one computer for driving the SDR. The data from that machine may display stuff on another computer. Yep, I've heard of people doing that, especially when they're running the Raspberry Pi setup, where that is running just the SDR, and then you're kind of doing like a remote desktop sort of situation, so you're not taxing both machines, or one machine with too many tasks at one time. So that's a good way to do things, actually, and something that maybe I should look into here. Let's see, Joshua Gosnell is in there. He says, hi, Tom, and good morning to you. Mr. Lucky Train also says, good morning, guys. And then Joshua Gosnell, he comes back and he says, I love my SDRplay RSP1A. It's a good device, but you got to watch out on the front end overload. And that's true. You gotta keep the gain kind of reduced a little bit if you have some strong signals that are around. And then he also says that he uses his RSP1A for just shortwave radio and using it for 10-meter opening. It's fun. I agree. It's a great receiver for shortwave and anything you want to do. And kind of like what we were just touching on, I think the price for performance to get into SDR receiving is pretty low for the amount of performance you get out of this thing. I think you're getting a good value on any of these radios. What do you think, Tom?
I think that's it. That last point is a good point. The only other thing I was going to mention is, if you want to try out an SDR and to see if it's using the software and getting it working is too complicated, you can get the RTL-SDR.com dongle. I've done a number of shows on that. I've talked with the designer, and so I kind of know him via emails. And that's an excellent little dongle compared to the ones that were originally designed for receiving TV. He took that basic design and redesigned it and made it work much better for other bands, for wideband, not just VHF and UHF. So if you want to start really basic and you want to get something that you know will work, it won't be, you can get it new from Amazon through my Amazon store for $19.95. That's it. That's all you have to pay, $19.95. All this other software you're seeing is free. You don't have to pay for that. And so if you're just starting out, that's one way to start out. But if you're confident or you've used these TV dongles before, if you want to step up, then I would definitely say, like Rob said, the best bang for your buck is the RSP-1A.
Yep, agree 100%, Tom. Back in the chat room here, it's starting to get a little active in there now. Jeffrey Plumcount comes back and he says, I live somewhat close to WBZ 1030 AM. That's, of course, in Boston. And he says it overrides many radios. You're not far from me, Jeff. I'm just down the road in northern Connecticut. BZ is manageable here. It's strong, but it's not overloading anything. I have trouble with WTIC 1080 out of Hartford. That's about 20 miles west of me, and that thing, that's a 50,000 watt station, so it can wreak some havoc here. But the medium wave filter on the 1A and the Duo, it seems to do a good job of keeping it at bay when I'm trying to listen to stuff. Mr. Lucky Train came back and he says, it is really necessary to use a computer for, oh, he's asking, is it really necessary to use a computer for SDR receiving? Would a tablet have enough computing power to run it? That's a good question. I've actually set up my cell phone, and did I run my tablet? No, I haven't tried it with the tablet, but I have an older Samsung Galaxy S4 that I set up and run with my RSP-1, and it worked fine. With what's the software for Android, Tom? SDR something.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know.
Yeah, it fell out of my head. I did set that up, and it worked well. I didn't have any issue with it. The 2 points I'll make on that, though, the first one being that whatever that software was, in order to get the waterfall display, you had to pay $10 for the app. You could download the app for free and run the radio with a brief demo of the waterfall, but in order to get the waterfall constant, you had to pay for the app. And I'm a cheapskate, so I never paid for it. The second thing I'll mention is that I don't think they've written a driver for any of the newer versions of Android, or I'm sorry, any of the newer versions of the SDRplay radios. So only the RSP-1 will work with my Android phone. The RSP-1A, there it is, SDR Touch. I don't think the RSP-1A or the RSP Duo will work with SDR Touch. You can see it right there in parentheses. It only supports the 1 and the 2 right now. So keep that in mind if you're trying it. I don't know if anybody plans to write a driver for the newer radios for SDR Touch, but it hasn't come out yet. Let's see. Oh boy, there's a lot going on in here now.
Good.
David Elkins says, good morning, Tom, and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
And Josh Gosnell comes back and he says, yes and no. Yes, you can run it, but you've got to get OTG cable for the tablet. But no part is it not strong for it. Yeah, that I think he's saying the same thing I'm saying, that it'll work. And that's a good point, though. You need the adapter, what they call the on-the-go cable. It's basically a USB mini to USB-A female adapter, really. There may be like wire crosses in it or whatever to make it work, but you got to get one of those, and then you can plug and power the RSP-1 right from your Android device, and it'll work. But again, you got to use the 1 or the 2. I think we're all caught up in the chat room there, Tom. You got any comments on any of that?
Yeah, I have used this program, SDR Touch, on my RTL-SDR.com dongle.
Oh, there you go.
And I was fortunate enough that the author sent me a key so I could use the full version. But it compared, for instance, to SDR Uno, it had very limited functions. And it makes sense because the Android tablets are not that powerful, or at least the one I have, which is Lenovo. So although it worked fine and had no dropouts, it was limited on, for instance, the display, how much you could display bandwidth-wise, and a couple other things. So I did not find it too useful. I did do a show on that. So you can go back to my older shows and you can see where I tested that out. And it does give you that portability, but I have not tried it with the RSP devices. I have not tried it with their devices.
Okay. David Elkins says, use a Raspberry Pi. He's probably right. That's probably got a little bit more power, and the software is probably a little better. I haven't tried that myself. And then Jeffrey Plum says, the RSP is great as a real general coverage unit. The dongles are more basic and inexpensive option. And yeah, that goes along with what Tom was saying. And I think it's, if you're just getting in, like Tom said, you want to start with, the dongles are great to just learn, but they're not fully capable. But the other one, the RTL-SDR, that gives you everything, and it's a nice price. And then once you get through and master that, then the next logical step is the SDRplay. Tom Murden is in there, and he says, what can I do to protect the RTL-SDR from damage? Do I just need a filter? I guess it depends on what you're doing and how you have it set up. If you have it close to another transmitter, then you need to have it switched out, either with a manual switch or the new, I don't remember the model number of it, the MFJ has an automatic RF sensing switch that can protect your SDR if you have it close by or on the same antenna type of thing. But if you're not using it directly with a transmitter, then you want to make sure you keep it away from any transmit antennas and things like that. But if you're just using it for just receive, then you don't necessarily need a filter, I guess. It shouldn't get damaged unless you're trying to run a transmitter nearby. What do you think, Tom? You got anything?
Well, one other thing you have to watch out for is static.
Oh, yeah.
And if you live in Florida, you got static electricity. But I have now probably collected 15 or 20 SDRs, and I have never damaged one yet. And I get kind of fumble fingers, and so they're pretty good. The only SDRs, which was as I mentioned before, the Tintec, they had that unprotected front end FET amplifier, and I was blowing that all the time just by connecting and disconnecting antennas where the antenna had been unconnected, so it built up a static charge. When I plugged it into the radio, bam, they got that FET.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. They've come a long way since then, I guess, with protection. They've learned their lessons with some of that stuff. Let's see. Mr. Lucky Train, he's asking, with my Samsung Galaxy S9i, with its 64 gigs, would that be considered good for computing power for it? How important is memory for SDR? That's a good question. I don't know if I can answer it because I'm not familiar with that particular tablet. All I can tell you is my experience with my older Galaxy S4 phone with whatever memory it had, 8 gig maybe, but that's storage memory. I don't know what it had for operating memory. It ran fine, but to Tom's point, the SDR Touch software that it runs is somewhat limited in functionality. So you're not getting everything that you can get on a computer, but you're able to use it, and it's a nice simple solution. You can take it out in the field, and you don't have a big clunky laptop hanging around with you. So if you just want to listen and tune, I would think it would be fine. If it worked on my S4, it should work just fine on that S9, as long as you have the right connections and things like that. Jeffrey Plum is saying that the RTL SDR are nice for purpose-built application. A buddy runs 5 dongles for feeding their internet radio servers. Oh, interesting. That is a good use for one of those. Nice, low, inexpensive type of setup, and you can set that up and you can run internet stuff, I guess. Oh, Mr. Lucky Train is saying that the Galaxy S9 is his phone. Again, I'm not familiar with it, but I'll tell you that if it ran on my old S4, which is what, 5 years old, architecture, technology, 5-6 years old at this point, and your S9 should be fine as long as you connect it up to one of the SDRplays or other radios that support SDR touch. Okay, so we're caught up, Tom.
Okay, and I want to thank everybody that stopped by, and especially those that are giving us comments and questions. That's exactly what I wanted to accomplish with these shows. So moving on, we have one more question under SDRplay, and then we're going to go to general questions. And the question is, where can you get an SDRplay?
I bought mine, my first one, I bought it from HRO. I'm not affiliated with HRO in any way, shape, or form. And I haven't really bought that much from them, but when I do, I have excellent luck. I've put an order in and gotten my item shipped to me the next day for free. So I don't know what they're doing up there, but they have pretty good customer service, and I've had good luck with all of the items that I've purchased from them. I don't know if anybody else has it in the United States. I know there's some resellers over in Europe that have them similar to what an HRO is over here in the States. But you can also get them directly from SDRplay from their website, I believe, although you're probably going to pay, maybe you're not. I don't know if you're going to pay a little more or you're going to end up paying for shipping or something like that. But if you're in the United States, I recommend HRO. What do you think, Tom?
My experience is, because I bought my first, actually one of my subscribers bought it for me, my first one directly from the manufacturer, and it took about a week to get it. And then the second one, which I got a couple weeks ago, that was given to me by the people at SDRplay, I got again from the factory in the UK, and it only took like 4 days to get it. And so I've gotten very good service as far as shipping from them. You also, and this is something I'm not too sure about, I have seen, because every morning I check eBay for radios so that I can use on my show. I am seeing these devices on eBay, but I'm not sure where they're coming from. I think some of them are coming from the UK, but I think there's other ones coming from someplace besides the 2 places we mentioned, and I'm not sure about those. The other thing is, price-wise, the UK, their base price is a little lower, but you have to pay shipping, and I'm talking about versus ham radio outlet. Ham radio outlet, their price is a little higher, but sometimes you can get free shipping, so it works out that they're basically same price, and you can get very fast shipping from HRO if you're in the United States, of course.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add about HRO, I live in Connecticut where we have, I think it's like a 6% sales tax or something like that. My closest HRO is in New Hampshire, which has no sales tax. So when I purchase things from them through the internet, they don't charge me sales tax. So that's another thing to look at. I don't know if that's the case for everybody out there, but it does work out for me, so I save a little bit on the tax as well.
Okay, check the chat room, and I'll go to the next page.
Okay, let's see. Mr. Lucky Train says, thanks for doing this show. You gentlemen are providing a great service to us newbies to SDR. By the way, is there a forum or blog for SDR that either of you would recommend? Well, you're welcome, Mr. Lucky Train. We're all learning together. at least for myself, when I go through this stuff with Tom and answer questions from you guys, I learn too. And that's the way it's always been for me. I'm no expert at any of this stuff, like Tom said at the beginning. So this just helps reinforce things for me. And sometimes I come away with questions that I need to go find the answers to. So that's how I learn. In terms of a blog or SDR forum, I know that the SDRplay people host a forum on their site, or at least it's linked on their site. Yeah, Tom will pull it up here now. There's an excellent running blog on there that they have, and John keeps it updated fairly often. Lots of information on there. And they also post some of the videos that the users, like myself and Tom, put up on YouTube. They'll throw those in a blog post and things like that. And then there's the forum here that you can go into. So if you want to ask questions, there's a great forum for that. There's a lot of people monitoring that, including the SDR technical support people. And there is also a Twitter feed. If you're a Twitter user, you can subscribe to them on Twitter. And they have a pretty active Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, you can search for SDRplay, and you'll find the Facebook group. And that is a great resource. I read that a lot. I don't post anything in there, because if I did, people would find out who I am. But outside of that, I do read it a lot, and there's a lot of good information there. Let's see, David Elkins. Oh, well, before I move on to the next thing, do you have any other comments, Tom?
I was just going to point out the fact that this forum, the one you mentioned, is very active. Look at these posts.
Yeah.
It is very active. So if you need information about this, this is another great place to go. Is their forum. And I'm also a member of their Facebook page, and it's very active too. As a matter of fact, contrary to Rob, I do a lot of posts on there, basically links to my shows on their products. So check me out.
Yeah, Tom's on there. I'm still reluctant to throw my real identity out there, just because of the nature of the work I do. I don't need any cross-pollination here with my employer. So
I understand.
And we'll just leave it at that.
Right.
Let's see. David Elkins is saying, Tom may remember me. I made a bunch of antennas for him, and he tested for me as well. Oh, I had to stop due to health reasons, but still love shortwave listening. Yeah, and I think I remember those videos that you made, Tom.
Yeah, and I have tried for months to contact you to find out if you're okay, because the last time I sent emails back and forth, you told me about your health problems, and then I didn't hear anymore. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope something didn't happen to him. So I am so glad that you joined in. That is a big relief.
Yeah, and then he also says he's in the process of attempting to make an SDR radio with Raspberry Pi with a built-in touchscreen, still ordering parts and in the design stage. Wow, that's interesting. If you end up getting something put together, it would be great to see it. I'm always interested in people making stuff like that. That's great.
Yep, same here, because I actually started that project myself, and I didn't get very far. I couldn't get the darn display to work. I don't know what I was doing wrong. But so it's sitting in a box someplace. I may have even done, I think I did a couple of videos on not that device, but the other one. Not the Raspberry, but the other one. I don't remember what it is. Anyway, yes, I definitely would be interested in that. Please let us know how you progress on it. Okay, now we got to the general Q&As, and these are more recent questions I've gotten. A lot of them very generic, but I think it would be of interest to everybody. Again, going back to one of my first slides, if you have questions or comments, please leave a comment. If you want to send me a direct question, you can send it to TRRS73@gmail.com. So let's go on. First question is, when will shortwave reception improve? Boy, I get that question a lot. How about you, Rob?
I guess it depends on when the government shutdown is over, right? We'll keep politics out of it. But that one, I can't really answer that. You probably have your finger on that more than I do. I'm working and I got a family and stuff, so I'm not really watching the shortwave forecasts. I turn the radio on, and if it's, if the band is open, I'm happy, and if it's not, well, then I go do something else, I guess. But we are sort of near the bottom or at the bottom of the current sunspots cycle, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully it's all uphill or downhill or whichever you want to look at it from here. What's your take on that, Tom?
Yeah, I've been watching that very closely. I have subscribed to, I believe NOAA puts it out. And they put out a bulletin every couple hours. It's like every 4 hours. You can get on their mailing list, and they will give you a report of the solar flux index. And of course, it's been down below 70 for months. It was earlier this year, it wasn't too bad. But starting in like September, October, it went into the toilet. Now, what we're talking about is, as Rob mentioned, one of the factors in receiving shortwave is what's called the solar flux index, which is an indication of the number of sunspots. And I won't go into details of why that affects shortwave. But bottom line is, the more sunspots there are, the better shortwave is. This is in general, not always, but in general. That solar flux index, SFI, it's called, is an indication of that. And the bigger the number is, the better shortwave reception should be. Now, there's a couple other parameters associated with the sun. And those can, as the numbers get higher, they can make things worse. Like I say, I won't go into too much detail. So once a week, I try to do a show that tells you what the band conditions are going to be like for the following week. And I get that from another YouTuber, a doctor. I can't pronounce her name. That's why I always call her Dr. T. I apologize, Dr. T. I can't pronounce your name, but she is a solar scientist. And so she does a show once a week about the conditions. And about a year ago, I asked her to do a few words about how it affects amateur operators and shortwave listeners. And she's added that to her reports. Very thankfully, she's done that. And so that's where I get my information. So anyway, this solar flux index occurs, it's like a sine wave almost. It occurs over an 11-year period, kind of an average 11-year period. And so over those 11 years, the solar flux index will increase up to almost, it'll go up to 200 sometimes. And then once it hits that peak over maybe 3 to 6 months, it'll stay at that peak and then it'll start coming down, just like a sine wave. And it'll go down. And this cycle is 11 years. It'll go down to a minimum of like 60s. And we're in that bottom. We're in the toilet, as I say. We're in the toilet. And it's going to be that way for several months. It could be as much as 6 or 8 months. And during that time, there will be occasionally, like this weekend, there will be occasion where a sunspot will show up briefly. And so you'll get, all of a sudden you get this increase in reception on shortwave. And so that's why I watch it every day. And if it does go up, like this week has been in 75-ish, I do a quick show and let you know, start your shortwave radios, start listening. And so that's kind of where things are right now. In general, they're not going to be too good for quite a while, for 3 to 6 months, I think. But there is hope by the fact that there was a sunspot this past week. The solar flux index rose above 75. We want it above 100. So 75 is still not that great. So it may be that it's finally breaking out of that valley there, that toilet, washing its hands off and going to improve. Next question. How important is an external antenna versus, a built-in antenna that you might have like on your, my Grundig 750 here has a built-in antenna. How important is an external antenna? How about you, Rob? What have you experienced?
Well, to be honest with you, an internal antenna has its place. If you have a portable radio and you don't have the means to run a piece of wire or whatever, then obviously it's what you've got, and that's what you've got to work with. And depending on the radio, some of those internal antennas work pretty well. But if you're really serious about listening to stuff, then you're really going to want any kind of an external antenna. I've done some testing. Well, I don't want to call it testing, but just some general using.
Experimenting.
Good. That's a good word. With, say, like a radio, like a Texan PL660, or even an older portable shortwave, where I've been out in the field somewhere, or even out in the yard, and it's got an internal antenna, and I'll tune around a little bit, see what I can hear, and I'll hear stuff. And then I'll just take any hunk of wire that I can find, and even if I run it over a lawn chair or something like that, I'll just get that wire out there, and generally I'll have better results on the piece of wire that's just laying on the ground or whatever, just a few feet off the ground, than I will on the internal antenna most of the time. But so I'd say it's always a good idea to get an external antenna up if you can. If you can't, then use what you've got, whatever your radio has. It's better than no antenna. What do you think, Tom?
I have basically, I only use external antennas. And the reason I do that, with the exception of when, like Rob said, when I go out in the field, then it's not quite as important. But I found that even a simple wire, as Rob said, even a simple wire attached to, and if you don't have an external antenna jack on your radio, you can just attach it to the telescopic antenna, will make a huge reception performance increase. I mean, I have some of those which either came with radios or somebody sent me one to review. These roll up on a reel antennas that's just a piece of wire with a clip on the end of it, and they make a big difference. The caveat is you really, especially in my environment where I got computers and routers and all that stuff running, you really can't use that inside. You have to, and we'll get to the next question now. Do you have to use shielded coax with an outdoor antenna? My opinion and my experience, and we're no experts, is absolutely. There's just too much RF noise created in your house from microwaves, TVs, cell phones, whatever. What do you think, Rob?
Well, first of all, I'll back up and I'll say for a minute, with the external antenna, let's say you have a setup like Tom or I have, where you have a shack and you have an external antenna and you have a portable radio on your desk that either doesn't have an external antenna jack or whatever. One thing that you can do that seems to work is if you just take a coil of wire and connect it up to your external antenna, even with just a clip lead or something to the center conductor of the coax, however you can get it to your external antenna. You then on the other end just make a coil, 5, 6, 7 turns of wire, whatever, and put it near the radio, near the internal antenna. You can couple the outside antenna to the inside antenna or the internal antenna of the radio that way without even making that physical connection. And that'll sometimes vastly improve your ability to receive. But of course, you have to already have the external antenna to do it. It's just another thing to try if you don't have a way to connect your antenna to your radio. And then, sort of like Tom said on the same lines, do you need a shielded coax with outdoor antenna? Now, it does help, especially in today's environment with computers and all kinds of things generating RF noise. But I will say that when I was growing up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, I lived with my dad. It was just he and I. And he had shortwave radios in the kitchen. And the antennas that he ran were just wires that went, directly from the back of his radios out across the yard to his barn. And there was no shielding, no nothing. And they worked just fine. But that was back in the 70s and 80s before we had a bunch of computers in the house and microwaves and cable boxes and all that kind of a thing. So back then, it worked fine. Nowadays, might not work so good with, RF everywhere floating around and causing problems.
Okay, the next question is, why use an SDR over just a standard radio?
That's probably a bigger topic. So let me pause there. I know there's been some activity in the chat room. Let's cover that first, if that's okay.
Sure.
And then we'll get to that. Let's see. Where did we leave off? Here's David Elkins. Okay. Jeffrey Plum, he said the new Raspberry Pi 3B Plus can be powered over the Ethernet cable for remote usage. A dongle might work better in this case. Yeah, he's right, I would think, because a dongle is going to draw less power than an SDRplay or some other type of SDR. So yeah, the smaller the SDR, the better it's going to work with that. David Elkins says he'll send a video when he gets further involved in his project. That would be great.
That'd be excellent.
Jeff Plum says, what about long wave, medium wave DX? Oh, in terms of the shortwave reception. I'll defer to Tom on that since he's more knowledgeable about the solar index and stuff. He's got his finger on that. How do you feel about that, Tom?
I don't really have any experience. I would think that long wave wouldn't be affected as much as shortwave.
Yeah.
But I could be totally wrong. As many of my subscribers and viewers know, I have totally failed in receiving a long wave international broadcast transmission. I tried and I've tried and I've tried. I asked Rob to try, and I think it was like on his first try, he received a station. The advantage Rob has is he's up in the northeast part of the United States, closer to Europe, and that's why I thought he might be successful, where I'm down in Florida and I'm on the west coast of Florida, so I'm on the wrong side. And I've tried and failed totally as far as long wave.
Yeah, it wasn't my first try, Tom. I'd been kind of playing around with it for a while, and I just got lucky, I think. It wasn't super strong here, but I did get that long wave station. And again, like you, Tom, and I'm no expert on this, I feel like long wave and medium wave to some extent are mostly ground wave type modes. So they're not as affected by the solar index. So you can probably still have some success getting some DX on those, even if the solar index is low for any particular given day. Let's see, David Elkins. Oh, he replied to Jeffrey. He said, Jeffrey, I'm going to use the 3B Plus. It will handle the speed and has the foundation I'm looking to do. Let's see. Jeffrey Plum also says an SDR can tune or decode almost anything with proper software. Oh, that's on the topic we're going to discuss here in a minute. And he says, I heard that a British long wave station was heard in Connecticut, United States. It was. That was me. I put that video up a couple of weeks ago. It was right around New Year's Day, I think, or maybe it was just before. I don't remember. I was up really late doing some research for another video that I haven't put together yet. And just before I went to bed, I tuned down there and heard that station. So I stayed up another 45 minutes or an hour to kind of capture it and see what I could hear. So yeah, that was a cool catch. I'd never heard one before, even though I had tried a few times since Tom's been asking me to see if I could receive one. And I haven't heard one since. So we just got lucky that night there. That was a little present from Santa, probably. Okay, so we are caught up in the chat room if we want to move back over to your list, Tom.
Okay, one thing, and I meant to mention it before, and I forgot. As far as the Raspberry Pi and running SDRuno, I wrote Mike, who is the support person from SDRplay, and asked him if I could use my existing RSP, I'm not RSP, my Pi 2. And he said, no, it's not powerful enough. You really need the 3, Raspberry Pi 3. So I've been toying with buying another Raspberry Pi and trying that out, because they do have on their website, they do have a download of, and I call it a distro, which means it has the operating system and their software already installed on it. And you can burn it to a little memory chip and stick it in your Raspberry Pi, and it will boot up and run their SDRuno. They have that file available, so you can do that. And I'm really looking to do that, because that would be cool if I could do that and not tie up a computer running my RSP-1A. Okay, why would you use an SDR over a standard radio?
Okay, well, there's a lot of reasons, I think, why you would use an SDR, and there's probably a few that you wouldn't want to use it for. So I guess some things that come to mind on my end, certainly if you're going to receive, if you're interested in receiving digital modes, FT8, Whisper, PSK31, whatever, an SDR makes that simple. All you do is tune the radio, pipe the audio to the decoding software, and you've got it. You don't need any other internal or interface cables or anything like that. So that's one thing there. The SDRs generally, if you're at the SDRplay level or above, they can cover almost DC to daylight. You don't have any limitations as far as what you can receive with those. They're just there. And then, of course, you have all the options and things with the software, with the filtering that you can change, that are more expensive in a physical radio to implement. Whereas with a software-defined radio, it's only limited by what the software developers have decided to put in there for the most part. I mean, a little bit of the hardware too, but there's so many things that you can play with in terms of filtering. And then, of course, you have the waterfall display, which is a huge deal for a lot of people. You can just see what's going on in the spectrum display and the waterfall. It's a very visual and audio experience, as opposed to a traditional radio, which is more audio, a listening experience as opposed to a visual experience. So there's some reasons maybe why you wouldn't use an SDR, especially a lower one, a less expensive one, like the ones we've been talking about. The filtering in them isn't as good as a traditional radio, so you will get some overload issues, and you'll get some signal images and things like that. But that can be overcome by just using it, playing with the settings and stuff as you learn it. You'll kind of find ways around that. That's another disadvantage of the SDR. Some people find the software has a bit of a learning curve to get over. It's a little intimidating for them because there's so many options. It's a little bit overwhelming. So there's that. And then, of course, an SDR, like we've sort of talked about already in this show, it's not as portable as a traditional shortwave radio that you can just stick some batteries in and go out in the field with it and turn it on and use it. You need the computer, or you need a tablet, and you've got to fiddle around with software and connections, and if it's a really sunny day, then you can't see your screen, and that kind of a thing. So portability, I think traditional radios still have over the SDRs, at least the ones we're using today here and talking about. And there's probably other things, but I'll let Tom talk about his feelings.
Okay, for me, the biggest selling point of an SDR is using it to find new transmissions. I'm not the person that will sit and tune a shortwave or any frequency and just sit there and listen to it. I'm always looking for stuff, something that's unusual, looking for weak stations and stuff like that. So that visual display using an SDR and the software associated with it is ideal for me. And I did a show a couple of shows ago where I said, I've gone to the dark side. Some people say I've gone to the dark side in that I've gone away from conventional radios to now almost exclusively using SDRs of some kind. And that's the reason, because I'm a searcher. I don't like particularly to, like listen to China radio and listen to a particular show, every night. I like to search for new things. I'm into finding what's called utility stations, which are stations that broadcast, like Rob was saying, data, weather information, and stuff like that. So I'm kind of sold on SDR for that reason. I still, like Rob said, I still use conventional radios, especially portable ones. Now I have sitting on my desk, which you probably saw earlier, I have my Grundig 750, which I love. I love that radio. But I would say, and it costs now, I don't know why it went up. And I think there's a question later on about this. It now costs almost $300 for that radio. And as far as capabilities, it doesn't even come close to my RSP-1A. It is very limited compared to my 1A. So cost-wise, it's not very cost-effective. Even though and I'm of the old school yet, in that I like lots of knobs and dials. And I think that's what's converted me over to SDRs, is the software gives you all these things you can play with as far as options, filters, bandwidth, and all that stuff. So I'm kind of hooked on SDRs. What's the best? Go ahead.
It's definitely a different experience between a regular radio and an SDR. And you really can't deny that there's a lot of technical advantages of the SDR. But just like the argument between a tube radio and a transistor radio, at the end of the day, they kind of do the same thing. You could argue and say the transistor radio is better, it has more capability, but there's just some nostalgia, or maybe I can't think of the right word, but you got a tube radio, it's sitting there glowing in the dark, you got that smell of the tubes, there's that ambiance. You're not going to get that from a transistor radio. And then the same kind of correlation can probably be made between a traditional radio and an SDR. You've got the physical buttons and knobs to turn and everything. The SDR has a lot more capability and a lot more things to do, but you're clicking a mouse and looking at a screen as opposed to turning a physical knob and playing with a radio. So it's just a different experience, and I don't know that one is better than the other. I think that's a bit subjective, but it's different.
Yeah, I think that's another thing, is it kind of depends on your background. Like I worked at Honeywell, and I was, heavily involved with computer stuff. And so I became hooked on computers, I'll say. And so I'm very computer savvy. At least I think I am. I do computer repairs. I do it for fun. I don't do it to make money. I do it for free. And so I'm involved 100% with computers. So that has pushed me over to the dark side.
Yeah, same here. I've always been involved with computers. I used to be a network administrator for a little while. I've done some programming. And the job that I do now is very computer intensive. So in a way, I've sort of gone the opposite way when it comes to the hobby. Now, of course, I obviously use the SDRs and like them and play with them, but sometimes I'm just done with computers because I've been staring at one for 9 hours already, and I don't need to look at it anymore. So, I'll just turn on a physical radio and play with that just because I'm overloaded. But again, it's just it's all about the experience, which one you want use and what you're trying to achieve from the hobby at any given point in time. We've got some comments here in the chat room, I guess, so I'll go back over there if you want me to, Tom.
Absolutely. That's what it's all about.
There is a user in here that I don't know how to pronounce this username. It's, let's see, Erty That's an interesting one. Anyway, I'll just call you Erty. He says, I'm going to try a lot of combinations like loop with LNA, magnetic loop with air cap, slinky hula loop, perhaps a helix magnetic loop, and a dipole, a 4-floor gutter. Is any of these absolutely not the best? I'd have to say give them all a shot. I have a friend that lives in a apartment complex. It's actually a senior living building. There's like 24 apartments in there or something. And he's been a ham forever. And this is the first time he's lived in a place where he can't have any kind of external antenna. And he's been experimenting with some of the things that you mentioned there and having good success for reception and transmit. He hasn't tried the gutter yet, but that's on his list. So if you do try it, let us know how that works out, because my friend would be interested in that. Okay, Erty also says he has an SDRplay 1A, an RTL SDR version 3, a no-name one, and a Texan PL880 to test with. Well, that's a good sampling there, I would think. You should have some success there and compare and contrast. Jeffrey Plum says his SDR dongle or RSP will replace loads of scanners and shortwaves. The knobs and dials are yours to find in software. Yeah, and that's a good point. That's a good point. The SDR radios can do almost everything a traditional radio can do, and more. And it's all about the interface. Like you said, the knobs and dials are there. They're just implemented in a different way. And then he also says, if you program, you might make your own software. Yeah, you could do that. There's nothing stopping people from writing their own SDR software. For me, I was never a very good programmer. I was more of an industrial interface type of guy. And when I say that, it wasn't lower level like PLCs or anything. It was more scripting for software to try and get CAM and CAD software to interface with manufacturing equipment. So I was writing higher level stuff. But the principles still apply. The only thing that's stopping me from playing with any of that in the shack here, writing my own software at this point, is time. And again, kind of burnout on the computer stuff. Just the job I do now is very computer intensive. It's not programming anymore, but still kind of the last thing I want to do when I get home from work is stare at a screen for hours. So I haven't done any of that yet, but at some point maybe I'll play with that. I don't really know what the future holds. And with that, we're caught up with the chat room.
Okay, the next question we've already answered, which is what is a good SDR to get started out with? And the next one is what is the best shortwave database? And I think what they're referring to there is on the internet, there are several shortwave station listings or databases that you can download or you can look at or whatever. And the question is, what's one of the better ones? And my input to that is there's a gentleman, I don't remember his name, that puts together one called EIBI. And he updates it quite often, and therefore it's quite accurate. On the other hand, I have shown many times another one I've used. It's a website, and the address is short-wave.info. And on that website, you can put in a frequency, and it will list the international broadcast stations that are on that frequency, or you can search the database in other ways. It's very useful, very helpful, but it isn't updated as much as the EIBI. How about you, Rob?
I'll be honest with you, I don't use any of those. My sort of approach to listening in the hobby in general is I tend to listen more to the hams. So I'll tune around the ham bands and find a conversation and listen to that. That's sort of what piques my interest. Every now and then, I will download and use the EIBI database and look at that if I want to find a particular station or I'm trying to test something and I want a reliable station to do it with. So it is useful for that. But again, I'm more of a ham band kind of guy. I like listening to the hams talk. But another site that I use periodically, it's not a database, and I think Tom uses this one too. Every now and then I get interested in listening to pirate stations or clandestine, whatever you want to say, that type of stuff. And I'll go over to the HF Underground forum, and I'll look there at the posts and see what people are reporting, and tune to some of that stuff periodically. But as far as the hard databases go, that's Tom's domain.
Okay, I brought up first. Well, I'm at right now HF Underground, which Rob mentioned. Here's their website. And this is another very, very active website. And this is basically originally about pirate radio, shortwave pirate radio, but now it includes a lot more beyond that. And you can see like down here is shortwave broadcast, long wave loggings, lots of, and look at the post, number of posts, and we got thousands of posts. This is a good, as Rob mentioned, a good website. The other one I mentioned is short-wave.info. And here you can search or find stations in various ways. You can come up here like select broadcast in English. Where is it? Oh, not all, any station broadcasting in English right now, and then say go. And it will give you a listing and a map. That's the beauty of this. It has to give you a map. So here I am down here in Florida, and here's all these stations that are on right now, theoretically, and the frequency and some information about it. So I use this a lot. Like I said, it's not updated as much as the EIBI, but it is fairly current. I've talked to the author and made some suggestions about the layout, and he's incorporated those suggestions. So it's a very good database. All right, let's go back to here. And I think we've answered that. Next one is, I live in a city. How can I listen to shortwave radio?
Well, that's a good question. I don't live in a city. I'm far from it. Even though I live in Connecticut, which is mostly a suburban type of area, I actually live in a pretty rural part of the state. In fact, I've got state forests surrounding me. So my closest neighbors are like a quarter mile away on either side. So I don't have any good tips for you there. But what I can tell you is, like I mentioned before, I have that friend that lives in the senior living home. And that's, not a city by any stretch of the imagination. It's just an apartment complex. And he uses various indoor antennas he's experimented with. Right now, the best thing that he's found, now, of course, he's a ham, so he transmits as well. He's made a loop antenna that goes around the windows of his apartment. He's got some pretty big windows in there. And the loop just goes around the windows. I don't even know if he's got it cut for a particular frequency or not, but he's got it set up. He feeds it with coax and a tuner, and he can get on the HF bands and transmit and listen. Now, it's compromised. It doesn't work as well as the antenna that I have out in the yard or something like that, obviously, but it gets him on the air, and it gets him into the hobby, even though he lives in that type of antenna, or in that type of situation, I mean. Now, I've heard other people experiment with magnetic loops, things like that are, can be used inside or put near a window or something like that. Or I've even heard of people, opening a window if that's available and just dangling a wire, down the side of a building or something like that with good results. So there's things you can do. You've got to get a little bit creative if you're living in an apartment or building or something like that. But of course, when you're in a city, as opposed to a rural area like this. Even if you're in an apartment, you're probably going to get a lot more interference from everything in the apartments and buildings and things around you. So that's going to be a tough thing to deal with. I don't know if you'd really be able to find a way to null that stuff out. Maybe the mag loops and things can help with that. But what do you think, Tom? Maybe you live in a more urban area than I do.
Well, I don't live, and I think this question comes from people who actually live in a city with tall buildings and stuff like that. And my suggestion would be to get a radio that's portable and go to a park, that you can get some distance between you and the buildings, you and the power lines and stuff like that. When I test portable radios, I will typically either try my backyard, which is still got a lot of power lines and stuff, or best case, I will go to a park. And there's one park, it's about 10 miles from me, that's a huge park, and therefore there's no power lines. If you get in the middle of the park, there's no power lines for about 1.5 miles, and that works excellent. One other option that you might not think of is listening to shortwave on the internet. And I've done quite a few shows on this where there are radios, and I think somebody mentioned that, there are radios, shortwave radios and scanner radios on the network that you can select and listen, and you can control and listen to shortwave. When I'm having problems getting a station, I will use that option to see if that station is even on the air. So what I will do is I will go through the list of stations that are on the air that I can use and find one close by the international broadcast station I'm trying to hear and see if that station can hear it, or try a couple, not too far away. And that will tell me if that station is broadcasting or not. So that's another way, what's the term I'm looking for? It's not the purest listening to shortwave radio. It's kind of cheating in that you're using somebody else's radio, but you can do it. All right, the next one is, where's the best place to get a radio? Get radios.
Well, it depends on what kind of radio you want to get. Like we talked about before, HRO is a good place for all things ham radio. And again, I'm not affiliated with them, but I've had excellent luck with them, so I'm not worried about mentioning them here. But of course, and Tom's mentioned this in a lot of his shows, you can get a lot of stuff on eBay. If you're looking for older stuff, that's a little hard to find. eBay is a good place to look, but you're probably going to pay a little bit of a premium there, just because people know what stuff's worth. And then, of course, you're going to pay shipping and things like that. Amazon, you can get a lot of stuff there, of course. One place, my favorite place to buy radios when I'm buying used radios is, we call them tag sales here in Connecticut, but it's I think the rest of the world would call it a yard sale, where you drive up to somebody's house and they're just selling all their junk out on the front lawn or in their garage or whatever. And I haven't done this in a number of years, but every now and then you drive around and you stop at someone's yard sale, or we call it a tag sale, and there's some little old lady there and her husband's passed away, and there's some radios there that he had, and she doesn't know what to do with them, and she's just got them there in the sale, and you can get a good deal sometimes on stuff like that, and a lot of times it's in good condition, things like that. Another place that I like to get radios, and I've had good luck, and I never stopped there this year, I never had time, is we have a local flea market every week in the summer here in Eastern Connecticut, and it's basically just a big yard sale. People show up and set up tables and sell all kinds of junk that they have, and usually I'll stop there a couple times a year, and at least once a year I'll find a great deal on a radio, because the people there, a lot of them are just cleaning out their garages, cleaning out their cellar. They've got this stuff they haven't used in a while, and they don't necessarily even know what it is. So they've got reasonable prices on the stuff. So in fact, I've got a couple of beautiful Panasonic radios, shortwave radios, that would sell on eBay for like $100, and I got them both for $20 or something like that at this flea market. So you never know what you're going to find there. Another place that I found used radios is an automotive swap meet or flea market. We have one of those nearby twice a year, and sometimes I'll go there, not to buy automotive parts, but to buy radio stuff. And you can sometimes get some fantastic bargains there because the people are there to sell auto parts, and they're just bringing the contents of their garage, and they find an old shortwave radio there, and they don't know what it is. They don't care. They just put it on the table with their car parts, and you can get some good deals there. And that's and of course, there's always ham fests. If you're an amateur radio person, you can go to a ham fest and look for radios there. Sometimes the prices on those there will be a little bit higher though, because the hams kind of know the value of the radios a little better, and they look at eBay before they go, and they're selling them sort of at eBay prices sometimes at the ham fests. So you can get lucky, but the prices are usually a little higher there. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't mention the last one, because that was going to be my input to this, is the ham fest. Unfortunately, in the past couple of years, as you alluded to, the prices at Amfest have gone through the roof. And I go to about three, nowadays, I go to about 3 Hamfest, and I am extremely lucky if I bring home a radio because the prices are just out of sight. And that gets into our next question is, why are shortwave radios so expensive if you can't hear anything on shortwave nowadays?
That's a good question. I'm not sure of that myself. I know you can get some new shortwave radios at reasonable prices, like the Texan radios, the PL660 and the 880 and stuff like that are somewhat reasonably priced, somewhere around $100 or so, and you get quite a bit of radio for your money. And even though they're Chinese radios, they seem to work fairly well for what they are and what they cost. And of course, you can't deny all the functionality that we're getting about the SDRplay radios that we talked about at the beginning of the show. You're getting a huge value for your money there, I think. But in terms of older shortwave radios, I think there's just that nostalgia collector factor there that is driving the price up. People with, they were kids and they wanted these radios and couldn't afford them when they were kids. Now they're older. They have kids of their own, and those kids are off at college, so they don't have as many bills as they used to, and they've got some disposable income, so they're hitting eBay and they're looking for these radios that they wanted when they were kids and collecting them and things like that. So it's demand, I think, might be driving the prices up a bit on some of this stuff. And I hate to say it, Tom, I don't know what you think about this, but I think people like you and I are actually part of the problem as well, where we'll be making videos of some of these older radios and some of these things, and we help to drive some of the interest out there. People watch our videos and they say, oh, that would be fun. I want to do that too. And they're willing to pay a few more dollars than we might be, and so on and so forth. So it kind of escalates from there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I've experienced is every morning I go on eBay for about an hour and search for radios that I don't have that I can review on my show. And I would say for the past year, I have found maybe 2 radios that I was willing to pay what people were asking. They're just, and the thing is that really concerns me is that these will be of the radios that Rob mentioned earlier. These will be radios that it appears that people have gotten from a garage sale, or their parents have died or something, and they're really dirty. they apparently the people that owned them before, maybe got sick or something in their later years, and so they just set in the garage, or maybe they died and the people that were left said, no, let's put this in the garage. We don't want it. We don't even know what this is. And they're really dirty. And all it would take is a damp cloth to wipe these off. But these sellers are not even doing that. So you look at these radios and you go, that radio is filthy. Why would I pay $200 for a radio that wasn't taken care of, which means it probably doesn't work? And so I am really, really struggling finding radios to review on my shows. The other problem is, as far as finding radios, is there are not too many new radios coming out. There was a period up to about 4 years ago. There were all kinds of new radios, especially out of China. The Texans, trying to think of some of the other names. And so there was a whole bunch of new radios to try out, and I would buy those and do a review on them, and people would see that and they'd go, oh, that's pretty good, I'll get one. But lately, I think the last new radio I got was the PL680, and that was a couple of years ago. And that may be driving the price up on these older radios, is there's not much new out there. So that's kind of my experience.
Yeah, that's a good point on the new radios. It seems like we're in a lull with new radios. Maybe that goes along with the sunspot cycle or something. We're at the bottom of the sunspot cycle, so new radios maybe aren't selling. So they've focused their attention elsewhere. Actually, one thing that I've noticed, and I used to be I got introduced into this hobby by my dad years ago, but when I was a teenager, some of my friends were into the CB radio. So I was big into that when I was young, in my teens and 20s. And I've sort of not paid much attention to it in a long time, just because the radios there never evolved. But what I've been seeing, there's a couple of other people I follow on YouTube, is that it seems like the resurgence in shortwave radio design that we saw, like you said, Tom, 5 years ago or so, where there were tons of new radios coming out, has hit the CB market now. And there's a bunch of new CBs out there with new functionality that you can buy. So I don't know if maybe some of these same factories make those radios too, and they've diverted their resources and energy and effort into that market because they saturated shortwave for the moment. But there is some life for CB out there if you're into that sort of thing at this point, which I haven't been. So I haven't really looked at any of those radios. I'm just aware that there's some new interesting stuff out there that hasn't been there for a long time.
All righty, got one more question on our list is what things can you listen to besides international stations on, I assume, shortwave?
Okay, before we answer that, let me look back at the chat room because I've been neglecting that.
Okay.
Mr. Lucky Train had said a while back here, I guess, he uses Skywave Schedule and Shortwave Schedules Premium, both Android apps, and like both. That must be for the shortwave database question.
Yes, yes.
I'll have to look at that. I've never seen those, but I'll write that down. And
I did a show on that.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay. So that's something to look at. I'll have to play with that. And then Erdy comes in and he says he got a Tandberg Solve Super 4 tube radio from 1945 and 5 from 1950 and several RadioNet Cour and Explorer from 1958 and up. Those must be European radios. The 4 did work 30 years ago. As a child, radio is a nice hobby. Yeah, it is. It's a fun hobby, and you can always find something new to play with or something new to listen to. And then you can also, it's not something that consumes your life. You can well, if you don't let it, you can have your radios and you can listen to them, and then you can kind of set them aside and do other things for a while, and then come back and they're still there for you. And, it's not, compared to some hobbies out there, I don't think it's a super expensive hobby. It can be if you let it be, but unlike other things, the price of entry is pretty low if all you want is one radio and you can get a Texan PL660 or an SDRplay and spend about $100, and you can make your own antenna, and you're good to go, and you're in the hobby, whereas some other things cost a lot more just to get started. Okay, so we're caught up there. So now I'll address the last question on Tom's list here. What things can I listen to besides international stations? Well, I alluded to this before. Some of the things I like to listen to are the ham bands. I'm an amateur radio operator. I do transmit sometimes. Not a lot, but every once in a while I get in the mood where I want to chase DX. Another thing I like to do is I like to chase SOTA stations, which that's an acronym, and it stands for Summits on the Air, where people will climb mountains with low-powered transmitters and then try and make a certain amount of contacts for credit on a website where they can kind of keep score and things like that. It's almost like a mini contest within ham radio. So I like to listen for those stations because they're very weak usually, and I'll even try and contact them. And I've logged my stations or my contacts and had fun with that. But in terms of just listening, it can be fun to kind of tune around the ham bands and listen for those weak stations sometimes. And then I like to listen to general ham rag chew for whatever reason. Sometimes the hams will discuss some very interesting topics, not even just radio, but sometimes there's current events, politics, other aspects of electronics. Who knows? So I'll sometimes, if I'm doing other things in the shack or in the garage, I have radios out there too. I'll just tune around and find some hams talking and just kind of listen in while I'm doing other stuff. Of course, if you have the SDRs like we talked about earlier, you can listen to and receive digital modes, which are kind of cool in so much as the technology that's involved and the distances and things that you can get with weak signals. And then, of course, another thing that I like to listen to that I mentioned before are pirates. And I don't do this all the time, but I kind of go in moods where I want to listen to some pirates. So I go on to HF Underground and see who's transmitting, or I just tune the radio in the pirate bands and listen and see what I can hear, that type of a thing. And then I also get moods where I want to listen to VHF scanning. So I'll listen to the public service, I'll listen to the railroads, sometimes dispatch the trains, air band, things like that, or even the business band. There's a couple businesses around here that dispatch through VHF, and they're kind of fun to listen to because they're not professionals, and they can sometimes, get kind of funny on the air, and they'll argue with each other or just say funny things and stuff. So there's a lot that you can listen to besides international shortwave. What do you think, Tom? What do you listen to?
I think you pretty well covered it. The only thing I would add is I listen to utility stations, what's called utility stations, which are typically either military or commercial. And for instance, at 11.175, that's a HF communication band or frequency for the United States Air Force. They use that for aircraft that are far away from any land bases where the VHF and UHF signals won't carry far enough. And you don't hear a lot. You just usually hear, just say, go do something, or, this is our position or something like that. But occasionally, and that's why I do a lot of just search, occasionally you hear some really strange things. I was listening to that band. This was this year, I think. I was listening to that band, and I heard these women talk. And of course, there are women in the United States Air Force. So at first, it wasn't unusual. And then they were talking not kind of military talk. They were talking just ordinary talk. And I found out later that this one aircraft, they had a special event where they were letting the wives talk to their husbands in the aircraft. And that's what I was hearing, is the wives talking. Now, whether that was true or not, I don't know, but that's exactly what it sounded like.
Interesting. What was that frequency, Tom?
11.175.
Okay. I've heard stuff like that tuning around the shortwave bands in the past where, you'll just hear these weird conversations and it just sounds like there's two people talking on a telephone.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's exactly what it was. It was a telephone patch so that the women were on the telephone and they were patched in to the transmitter that was transmitting on that frequency.
Interesting.
And the other thing that I've listened to is and right now with the solar flux index in the toilet, I don't hear it much, is the fishermen over in Japan communicate on the HF band, and they will communicate with each other about fishing conditions, what's the best kind of beer, and a lot of times they will be speaking in English so you can understand them, because I think some of the owners of some of these fishing boats are English Americans. So that's kind of interesting. Go ahead, Rob.
No, that's just interesting. This was commenting.
Oh, and so I do a lot of just looking for what I call utility stations that are not international broadcast stations, and a lot of times it can be very boring. But I'll tune the radio and just let it sit there while I'm doing something else in the room, and all of a sudden I'll hear something like that, and I'll turn the volume up and listen to it, and it's just interesting. That's all I can say. It's just like I'm eavesdropping on their conversation, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So
okay, I think we're caught up. I can't believe we've gone over 2 hours.
Yeah, me too. And my wife is probably wondering what happened to me. She's probably going to come down here pretty soon and strangle me.
But I've really enjoyed it, and I'm glad we had a lot of people that contributed to it. That's the whole idea. And I really, really appreciate Rob's help with this. Makes it a lot more interesting than me just babbling. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, I agree. I always enjoy when you invite me on, Tom, and I appreciate it. I'm not real comfortable with the live format, just doing it myself. I've experimented with it, but it's much more engaging when it's the two of us going through all this stuff. I think we covered a lot of ground today. There was a lot of questions here, a lot of food for thought, too, for me, in terms of topics to cover and things to mention in future videos. So the feedback is always good because, when people ask us questions, we know what they're looking for, and we can kind of tailor what we present, for the audience, so to speak, so that it's a little more interesting and helpful for them. And like Tom said, we appreciate everybody in the chat. That makes it interesting too, to interact with everybody out there, not just us kind of talking at each other. But yeah, Tom, thanks for inviting me on here. It was a good show. We covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, and I know for me, I've learned a lot through these questions, gotten your inputs. And so it's been enjoyable for me. Hope to do more of these. And I think it's a good format. And we've kind of, worked the bugs out of doing this. And I think we're getting a little better at it. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, it seems like we're getting there. Yesterday was a little bit of a disaster, but we worked through that. We know what we did wrong, and I think we had a very successful show today. I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Okay, if you'll check the chat room one more time, we'll wrap this up.
Okay, I don't see anything new over there. It looks like we're all caught up from before, so I think we're good to go.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for stopping by. And if you didn't catch this live, I'm going to try to do one of these every Saturday with or without Rob, because Rob is very busy. Me, I'm retired, and I can pretty much set my own schedule. And if you enjoyed this show, please give me a thumbs up. I would say I'm sorry it was too long, but I'm not sorry, because we went over a lot of information and gave out a lot of details, and hopefully it's going to help a lot of people out.
Yeah, I agree. It was a long show, but there's a lot of information there. I think people who weren't tuned in for the whole thing, I think they can watch it later and skip through, and they'll find some interesting stuff if they kind of pick and choose the topics they're interested in.
That reminds me of something. I don't know if you do this, Rob, and I'll confess, I do this. When I'm watching long videos, I use the 2 times speed on YouTube. And typically, they do a pretty good job of that. And the audio, although it's kind of speeded up, it's still intelligible. And I'll play it and I'll go off and do something else. I hear it in background. And if I hear them mention something that's really interesting, I'll go back and then I'll play it at the normal speed.
Yeah, I've done that too. Like you said, it works really well. For me though, a lot of times I'll start that and then I'll hear something interesting and I got to slow that back down, and then I forget to speed it back up again. But yeah, I do use that feature from time to time to get through a video when I don't have a lot of time to watch it in real time.
Okay, if you have any comments or questions, if you're viewing this show later on, so you didn't get a chance to make a comment live, please leave a comment, or you can send me an email to TRRS73@gmail.com. I thank you all who did stop by, and we'll catch you later.
Yep, thanks everyone for stopping by. We'll catch you on the next one. 7-3.
Bye-bye.